Hello. Good evening, everyone. Welcome again to the RIAK Monday Assembly. This is our Monday evening ride. This is our nice and chilled group ride. We've got a fantastic course for you this evening. But I guess kind of one of the main reasons we're all here is to learn a little bit as well. For those of you that are new to these sessions, my name is Rich. I'm the founder and head coach at RIAK Fitness. We're a coaching company, looking after triathletes and cyclists for the most part. But yeah, we're looking after basically any old crazy endurance athletes. So the group ride's just about to start going now. Off we go. So guys, don't worry, you can take this as hard or as easy as you like. I usually put it around at about 2 watts per kilo, just trying to keep it nice and steady. We've got a fantastic course in this session. We're riding sort of the last 32 Ks of a really interesting race called Tro Bro Leon. You might have heard of it. I think if you go on the website, it's at risk of being too cool for its own good, because you go on the website and it's very interesting, but you get very little information as to what the actual race is. It's all very poetic and edgy. But basically, it's a kind of gravel road, cobble type, Roubaix-ish race. The pro race and the Grand Fondo, actually, you can ride it yourself. That was at the weekend, I think. Yeah, super cool race. I can't remember. I don't think it's on GCN or Eurosport, but you should be able to find a stream of the pro race at least somewhere. So yeah, that's the course for this session, guys. And in terms of what we're talking about, we're going to be talking about racing. We're going to be talking about the different types of racing and how to approach your training. Now, I warn you guys, I haven't done a huge amount of prep for tonight's session, because I'm really hoping you guys are going to want to talk about your own specific events, and I can give a little bit more kind of tailored advice. But I'm going to go through the different types of racing, hopefully as quickly as I can, really, so then we can discuss your stuff. But for those that are joining us for the first time, excuse me, I was about to cough. Don't know why I turned away. The microphone stays close to my face anyway. For those of you that are new to us, guys, there's plenty of ways to kind of get in touch to ask your questions. For those of you in the Zoom meeting, you can unmute yourself, ask away. You can use the Zoom chat. There is also the RGT chat, which I have actually got running. So often for me, for whatever reason, the remote app doesn't work. And then for anybody watching the live stream, we're across all the social channels as well, so you can leave your comments on the live stream and we'll pick those up. But now, those guys, just chill out, get yourself up to speed, and as I say, just take this as hard or as easy as you like. You can head to the front. We've got the rubber banding effect on, so it should keep us mostly together. But you can head to the front and drive it on, or if you're on an active recovery ride, you can just sit at the back and chill. But hopefully you'll come away with a little bit of information and whatever you need in terms of a training perspective. So talking about the chats, just make sure I've got everything open. Yeah, okay, that should be all of them. You should see my screen right now. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, and not a good one. It's just stuff everywhere. Hopefully the text survives. It's been all right so far in the last few weeks. So guys, racing. Now, the types of racing we're going to talk about tonight, what specifically to start with at least, talk about time trialing and triathlon, e-racing, which is kind of one of our specialities, crit racing, road racing, and then after that, kind of anything else. Talk about cyclocross if you like, or whatever you want. But we'll just start off by talking about time trialing and triathlon, because you can kind of lump those together. Now, if you guys are new to the session, just a quick FYI, we also run a Wednesday session. So we're now running 2 sessions. Only one of them has the live stream though. So the Wednesday morning 9:30 a.m. BST is our To The Limit session, which is a mixed threshold VO2 max type session. Really good high quality training. And then we're rerunning that as a group workout at 6:30 p.m. the same day. But only the morning session will have the live stream. But if you want to do the evening session, you can just watch the recording from the morning session. So killing 2 birds with 1 stream, basically. So that's just an FYI, guys, in case anyone's new to us. Our online sessions are totally free, and other than that Wednesday evening session, they've all got a live coaching feed. We also have a Tuesday evening strength and conditioning workshop. Okay, so endurance athletes, cyclists tend to be a little bit hit and miss with their strength training. So our current total workout series is a really short, sharp 30 to 40 minute workout. It's not HIIT training, but it's quite dynamic, and it's going to hit all the areas that an endurance athlete and in particular cyclists need to hit. So in particular hip stability, glute activation, etc. So there you go. That's a little bit more about us for any newbies. Immediately realised I forgot to fill up my water bottle, which is not good news because I trained just before this session. What not to do after a session in terms of post-recovery: not drink enough. So just a quick, we're going to get into the racing chat now, but just a quick FYI, guys. Our sessions go well kind of watched together. Okay, so there's some information that I would like to cover tonight, but actually we're just not going to have time. In terms of kind of one thing springs to mind is rider profiling. I'm not going to be able to cover that in any depth. Peak powers and things like that, I'm not going to be able to cover in any depth. We've done sessions on them, and guys, you can actually rent what we call our cycle seminars, so sessions like this covering the same sort of information. You can rent them, and you also get an hour's kind of endurance ride with them. So if you want to learn more about our cycle seminars and kind of stuff that they're covered, just head to our website, guys. It's very similar to this type of session, but you can do it in your own time and take a bit more time over the information that you're receiving. So as I say, some stuff that we would like to cover tonight, we're just not going to have time to do so. So starting off on the racing, let's talk about time trialing. And I've kind of lumped triathlon, so we're a triathlon coaching outfit as well as covering cycling. I've lumped it in together with time trialing because basically, you know, the bike leg of a triathlon is a time trial, generally speaking, unless it's draft legal. But it's a time trial sort of light, because you've always got to run after it, and I'll talk a bit more about that at the end of this kind of time trialing segment. But basically, when you're talking about time trials in terms of the conditioning, you're talking about kind of steady state FTP type efforts, generally speaking. Obviously time trials vary dramatically in terms of their profile and their length, but if I'm talking about kind of like the standard 10 mile or 25 mile time trial you generally get in the UK, yeah, you're talking sort of around threshold type effort, whether you're below, at or above threshold, kind of depends on the length of the course and the profile. So my top tip, and this might be where we lose some of you if you've not been to previous sessions, my top tip for kind of judging time trials and doing a bit of preparation and learning about the type of power that you need to put out is to get to know your power duration curve. Okay, so what that is, guys, if you're completely unfamiliar with that terminology, it's just basically a curve. There's various different platforms that will kind of give you examples of it, but it's basically a curve that kind of estimates the type of power that you can put out over particular durations. So Training Peaks is a platform that we use with our athletes that has a former power duration curve on the dashboard. We actually use a much more advanced piece of software by the same people as Training Peaks called WKO, and that gives you a much more in-depth power curve. And then, of course, we've spoken about it a number of times. There's a free platform called Golden Cheetah, which will give you a critical power curve, which is basically the same thing. But again, it will just take all your data, run various algorithms over it, and spit out kind of in a nice, easy to understand curve, kind of specific power targets that you should be able to hold over a particular duration. So, for instance, if you're doing a 40-kilometer time trial, for many that's sort of around an hour, or some people use it as like an hour's testing, or if they're relatively advanced riders, and so for that they would go to you go to your power duration curve, and obviously it should be your FTP basically, okay, because your functional threshold power, guys, it's meant to represent the power that you can put out for a full hour. Okay, but so that's just kind of one resource. We talked about power duration curves and the different platforms, etc., on different sessions, so I'm not going to go into that in any depth. But just as kind of like a snapshot, you're talking steady state around threshold type efforts, depending on how high, depends on the duration and the profile of the course. Okay, now how do you train that? Well, it's actually very simple. So much of time trialing is actually very simple. It's made highly complicated often by technology, by what kit you're running. Aerodynamics plays a huge part in it. People always tinkering around their position, but obviously you've got to train it. You've got to be fit as well. There's a reason why guys like Filippo Ganna, Tom Dumoulin, etc. are so good. It's because they're absolute units. They're super strong guys, but they also they have a great aerodynamic profile. They have a great setup on their time trial bike, and it's just all the small stuff that comes together. So lots of steady state training. And one of the questions that I often get asked is, how much low intensity endurance work do you need to do? And I'll be talking about it with each of the different formats, different types of racing. How much long weekend riding do you have to do to support the higher intensity training? And it's kind of like saying how long is a piece of string, really. It really depends on your event, your current fitness. For time trialing, you're going to need a decent base. So if we're talking about a type of racing that involves around threshold, around FTP type effort, just remember, we've spoken about an article that I wrote about functional threshold power, about FTP, which kind of explains what goes into it. So remember, there's two components. There's the strength element, which is all the high intensity training, the FTP type intervals, VO2 max intervals, etc. But then you've also got the long, steady state, lower intensity riding, and you have to have an adequate amount of both in order to improve your aerobic threshold, to improve that FTP. Okay, so often we see people when they come to us and as athletes, they've got training platforms like RGT, or Wahoo RGT as it is now. You know, they've got, I'm trying to remember, everything's changed recently. So I'm trying to remember all the right names. You know, Zwift, all the other platforms. I'm trying to remember who's bought who now. You know, they're very good at doing the sessions that are on there, you know, and a lot of the time you're going to get things right by picking an FTP type program or FTP type workout. But it's the long, lower intensity mileage that they're not so good at and they're much less consistent at. And that's for the obvious reasons, you know, it gets to the weekend and they've got kids, or, you know, stuff gets in the way, hangovers, etc., etc. You know, so basically, in terms of training to be a decent time trialist, so much of it, like anything when it comes to training, is about consistency. It's about getting in both the hard work, but then the long, easier work as well. And it's usually the long, easier work where people that do types of time trialing and triathlon, it's usually that where people kind of fall down. And we're not talking about every single weekend you're out on your bike doing 3, 4, 5 hours, but we mean consistently. So, you know, you might not necessarily have time to do 4 or 5 hours or whatever, but you're still getting out. You're still doing 1, 2 hours, and just each week, you know, you're still kind of ticking over, able to increase when you've got the time, but just generally being consistent in kind of doing the slower, steady state stuff. Because I find that people are very consistent, well, for the most part, consistent in doing the hard work, those high intensity training sessions, blasting themselves to bits, because it's very easy to understand how that can be helpful to you. It's going to make you stronger. But generally, when it comes to triathletes and time trialists, they lack a bit of consistency on the lower intensity working. Okay, so that's kind of my main bit of advice to you. The high intensity training for time trialing is very simple. You know, steady state type efforts, spending as much time as you can in an aero position. And that's another important point to say for time trialing, is it's all well and good being strong as an ox, but you got to hold that power whilst in an aero position. You know, whilst on the aero bars, the drops, or whatever type of race you're doing. Okay, so make sure you spend time doing those race pace type efforts whilst in an aerodynamic position. Otherwise, typically what you find is if people haven't trained that position enough, their lower back goes, or they get really stiff, and that's when you see them kind of getting out of the saddle, stretching out their lower back, you know, doing this and that. It's because they haven't got the stamina for it. And then just one final thing for time trialing: core. I know everybody says this about having a strong core is so important. But for time trialing, it is crucial. If you think about you're holding a steady power for a long time, that means having a really sort of steady base. It's not like, you know, watching Alberto Contador riding up the Stelvio afterwards. You know, he's out of the saddle, dancing around. He looks incredible. Looks like he's born on a bike. Fortunately, time trialing is not like that in many respects, in my personal opinion, because I actually like time trialing, despite being a triathlete. Time trialing can be quite boring, really, and it's all about basically keeping the central pillar, including your head, as steady as possible. And when people start to rock and roll like this, it's because their core is failing. So in training that, again, very simple. Lots of static holds, lots of core conditioning, so not strength work as such, but conditioning, so planks, lots of different types of planks. Okay, so not just training kind of your posterior chain, so on your front, working your anterior chain on your front, work your posterior chain as well, so supine planks on your back and things like that, side planks, working your obliques. And side planks, by the way, guys, really important, are really good for building stability around your hips, because it's your hips the muscles around your hips, your glutes, your abductors, adductors, they're the muscles that push your hips up. Okay, so guys, those are a few bits and bobs about time trialing and triathlon. Now obviously just on that last bit, triathlon, you got to run after it. Okay, so you have to be really kind of careful as and disciplined about how you pace your effort, and that's where planning and preparation comes in. So in the last session we talked about some really useful resources that you can use to plan your race. Time trialing and triathlon are where those resources really come into their own. So talking about things like Best Bike Split, Aero Coach, you know, a lot of them are free or have like really good free resources. Just running your data through them can make a huge difference. It can, you know, really inform you as to the type of power that you think you might be able to hold, and then you've got to try and run after it. Now for triathlon, the different we've got general rules that we use to help our athletes prepare. I'm not going to go into them because I'll be giving too much away. But basically, yeah, you've got to train for your type of racing. So if you're a short course racer, so you'll do sort of sprint triathlons, obviously your race pace on the bike is going to be closer to sort of sweet spot or just under threshold, or maybe even at threshold at FTP if you're super strong. And then as you move up the distances to Olympic distance, etc., you're definitely much more down into sweet spot or into zone 3, so around sort of 80 to 90% of FTP. And then moving up towards half line distance, again decreasing that down a bit more, so that's where you're down between sort of, I'd say like 75 and 85% of FTP depending on your level. And then you can see where it's going. Ironman, much more around the 70 to 80% of FTP mark, near sort of top end of zone 2/zone 3. So hopefully some of that made sense. Time trialing, steady state efforts at or near your FTP for relatively long periods of time. Train that core. Okay, train that position as well. So that's time trialing. So that's just kind of like a quick overview. I'll just pause very briefly to have a drink and to check, see if anyone's got any questions. As I say, if you're in the Zoom chat, guys, do feel free to kind of unmute yourself and ask away. Otherwise, no problem. You can use the Zoom chat as well. There's the RGT chat, which I am across. And then for those guys watching the live stream, again, we're keeping an eye across all the comments there as well. So you can ask your questions in the comment section of the live stream. I've fallen back a little bit, so I'm just going to lift my effort a little bit just so I can stay towards the front. Actually rocketing through this course, guys. It's much harder when you're doing it over gravel and cobbles, etc. I imagine, anyway. I haven't done it. I'd love to do it. It's definitely on my list of things to do. Just try and get back onto this group here. So next up, we're going to talk about e-racing. So about as dramatic a change as you can get. And as I say, sorry, just one last point about time trialing. We do actually have a very good FTP builder plan, which is one of our on-demand plans. So if you go to the on-demand section of our website, you can have a look at kind of what that involves. But you also might notice that there's FTP builder sessions in the RGT app, the RIAK sessions. There are sessions, and they're good, guys. All right, we did a whole 12-week FTP builder series. Those are the sessions that we did, and then we made them available to everyone. They're good, okay? They're not just, you know, our kind of rubbish sessions that we don't mind giving away for free. That's not how we do things. They're good sessions. So if you really want to pump up that FTP, use those sessions in the app, in the RGT app, or we've got a more in-depth training plan on our website, which you can, it's not free, I'm afraid, but that will really kind of help you in all aspects, not just the high intensity training. And then of course we've got our Wednesday total work to the limit sessions, which will be great for improving your FTP. So some resources there. And then likewise, just moving on to e-racing, we've got some e-racing plans on our website as well, one of which is free. They're 12-week plans, so have a look at those. But basically e-racing is about as different to time trialing as it could be. E-racing is just chaos. And if any of you guys that have done it on RGT, it's probably, in my opinion, the best platform for racing. I'm not sure I care too much about it being realistic. I know for a lot of people that's kind of a big deal, but for me, I'm not so bothered about the racing being realistic, because e-racing is a type of racing in itself. I want e-racing to be fun, and I think that's something that kind of I'm personally against, is making e-racing too much like real world racing, more than it already is perhaps, because you know, it's something different. You know, if I wanted to do crit races all the time, there are winter crit series, I just do those. I don't, e-racing, the kind of glorious part of it is that it's totally crazy. You can try tactics you would never try in real life. Like, I love a bit of e-racing. I don't think I'm too bad at it. I've tried some tactics which I just never even considered doing in real life. And it all comes down to the fact that you can just blow your doors off, hop off your bike and have a cup of tea, rather than having to drive 2 hours to a wind-blasted aerodrome, you know, get spat out the back and then have to drive for another 2 hours home. You know, e-racing's got so much for it, guys. So accessible. So yeah, we've got plans available for that, so feel free to check out our website on the on-demand section. But basically, in terms of the training, what we're talking about here are lots of anaerobic lifts, lots of bursts, very short anaerobic lifts, and usually off around a tempo level. So because e-races are usually so short, that like the kind of average power of them is usually quite a bit higher than a real world race, and so you're usually kind of, it is a massive generalization, but you're usually at least at around 80% of FTP for your average power, and so you're pretty much on the pedals all the time. There's very little recovery, and there's lots of speed changes. And so in terms of your training, what you're really looking to do is lots of anaerobic efforts, so short, sharp, you know, 30 seconds to 2 minutes long, but repeatability is key, more so than any type of racing. You are going to have to do those 30 seconds, 1 minute efforts again and again and again if you want to be good at it. Okay, so it's not necessarily about kind of having the biggest top end power and being super explosive, although that is helpful. It's about being able to do it time and time again. Okay, so what you really want to be working on is that full gas power over the course of about 30 seconds to 2 minutes, maybe longer of course, depending on the races. So obviously in e-racing there's a huge variety of races, which is another glorious aspect of it. You know, some of the races are up to 2 hours long, but not for me personally. Couldn't stay on the turbo for that long, which is ironic because it's pretty much my job. You know, yeah, you're not going to need kind of that huge endurance base that you might do, say, road racing. Okay, so but you do still, even if you're focusing on that short duration power, there's only so many sessions you can do that a week, probably, to be honest, only once, maybe twice a week max. But you've got to balance that out still with low intensity training. Okay, and there's various ways you can do that. You know, even in your low intensity training, you can still throw in a couple of efforts just to kind of, you know, kind of top up your weekly volume in of anaerobic efforts. But you still need to do low intensity training, guys. It's a bit of a misnomer. Obviously, you get track sprinters who do no base training, but they're track sprinters. E-racing, you're still going for, you know, an hour, as I say, sometimes 2 hours. You still need to be able to hang on that amount of time. In terms of how long your long rides needs to be, again, how long is a piece of string? A big part of it depends on the races, the types of races you're doing, and how many of them you're doing as well. Because if you're doing more races, if you're racing several times a week, you might struggle to get the low intensity training in. But ironically, you probably need a bigger base in order to handle that amount of training, and that amount of racing, and help you recover more quickly. So, yeah, it's always a bit of a balancing act. I think the easiest thing for me to say is you need some low intensity training, if nothing else, just to kind of help you recover, help balance out the anaerobic stuff. Okay, so as a general rule, that's what we're talking about when it comes to e-racing. Short, sharp efforts, repeated multiple times, 30 seconds to 2 minutes or so. Again, just as a very rough rule. Okay, that sort of stuff is going to make you better, basically. So that's e-racing. As I say, we've got plans for that. We've also got kind of dedicated coaching, but kind of not moving too far away. I'll just pause quickly in case anyone's got any questions about e-racing. So I was laughing at the live transcript. I said e-racing. Anyway, moving on. So crit racing is our next format of racing. Now, it's not too dissimilar to e-racing. I think the two actually, they kind of work nicely together. So if you like a bit of crit racing, doing a lot of e-racing over the course of the winter, it can really get you to the beginning of the crit season absolutely flying. So yeah, really recommend that. If you like a crit, get into the e-racing. It will really help. They are similar, but with crit racing, the efforts tend to be fewer of them and a bit longer. Again, as a massive generalization. So you're kind of talking about, you know, rather than the 30-second efforts, you're more shifting up to sort of 1, 2, 3, 4 minute efforts. Because really in crit racing, you're looking to maybe do only 1, 2, or maybe 3 if you're an absolute weapon. Maybe 1 to 3 big pushes. Oh, anything more than that, you're probably going to gas yourself for the finale. Because with crit racing, often it comes down to a bunch sprint at the end, which obviously means you need to work on your out and out sprinting. So that's your 5 to 20 second power. Okay, max effort sprinting. That's a much bigger part of racing than e-racing, because e-racing generally it breaks. It's the sprinting still a big part of it, but I'd say crit racing you get a lot of sprint finishes in crit racing, because usually, especially these days, with everyone being a lot fitter, the bunch usually stays together more, and wind becomes a big deal in crit racing. Okay, so normally crit courses are, as I say, on a aerodrome or dedicated cycle circuit, and they're usually quite exposed, and so that's one of the main reasons why you can only do a handful of efforts, or big efforts, because usually at some point you got to turn into the wind, and that's where being on your own or in a small bunch, that's when it really hits you. Okay, so that's probably one of the main reasons why you can only do 1 to 3 big efforts in crit racing and get away with it. Also, with crit racing, your average power tends to be a bit lower, so if you're smart about it, the vast majority of the time you'll be doing very little effort. It's one of the hardest things to do, particularly when you're new to bike racing, is let other people do the work. I think there's, particularly when you're inexperienced, there's a impulse to kind of be working hard all the time, to drive the race along, be involved, always be at the front, which is true to a certain extent. You don't want to let any breaks go away, but you got to let other people do the work, and you got to be prepared to lose. I think you can get away with a lot more in e-racing, whereas crit racing, nah, you have to be super smart about how you race. So fewer but longer efforts, a lower average power in racing, because if the e-racing, I said, you're normally doing anaerobic lifts off a tempo type effort, off around sort of 80-85% of FTP, because the race is always driving on. But with crit racing, you're talking more of a, I don't know, often kind of like a zone 1, really easy effort. You're just cruising around, then you pick your moment, you explode, and then you have to try and break the elastic, and that's why the efforts tend to be longer, because your initial burst might be 2-3 minutes, and then you've got to try and hold a somewhat kind of FTP type effort for as long as you can, basically, for as long as you need to. And so it's a much more considered type of racing, longer efforts, kind of at around VO2 max, if not slightly below, depending on your level. So that's crit racing, really. That's a really hard one to talk about, because it's so varied. So I'll just try and summarize that a little bit, just so I'm being a bit clearer. But you're basically talking about still short efforts, but slightly longer than e-racing. So you're talking a minute to 3-4 minutes. And then if you do manage to get to break away, you're then talking about trying to hold sort of an FTP type effort off the back of that. And that's if you're on your own. But then if you're in a bunch, every time you're rolling through, you're usually every time you're hitting the front, you're usually doing sort of around 115% of FTP as you roll through the front, recover, and then roll through again. So suddenly you're doing 30 seconds at VO2 max type power as you're rolling through. So as I say, it is very varied. It's hard to kind of nail down, but hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of the type of training you need to do. Hopefully that helps a little bit. I feel like I need to summarize that again. I won't, but if anyone wants me to summarize the crit racing training again, let me know. So I do fear that wasn't super clear, but just in the interest of time, I will move on. I think if you confuse yourself, you kind of have to repeat it. If we've got time, I'll go through that again, hopefully in a slightly more succinct and palatable way. But moving on to road racing, and then again a huge amount of variance here, but as a general rule, the kind of key point here is for road racing, you're going to need a much bigger endurance base. Okay, for road races, you can be talking an hour up to 100 miles. I think the Tour of Cambridgeshire, which is a big race in the UK for amateurs, I think that's about 100 miles, or is it 100k? I think it's 100 miles. But it's a big old race, you know. One of our athletes is doing it this year, and I think he was a bit surprised as to how much of an endurance base he needed just to make sure he can get through the race, because he's a strong guy, so he'll be fine on the racing side of things. But you know, is he a triathlete or is he not a triathlete? I don't know what he is these days, but you know, he's used to the whole triathlon type of volume. I don't think he was expecting it when it came to doing a road race. So yeah, much bigger endurance volume, so much more long, lower intensity training at the weekends or whenever you can get it in. Now, with road racing, as I say, it's very course specific, but you're generally speaking talking about longer efforts again. So, because when you're often, if you're making a break or you're chasing someone down, you've always got in the back of your head, right, I still got an hour after doing this effort, or 2 hours, or however long, usually a long time basically, till the end of the race. So I can't go super crazy. I need to try and break the elastic with this brake, or catch, or get onto the back wheel of whoever's going away. But I can't afford to go too deep, because I've then got to recover and stay with it. But so you are talking again longer sort of VO2 max type efforts. The duration of them again depends on the course, but as again a massive generalization in the UK road racing scene anyway, they're basically bigger crits, so they're usually a circuit, and I don't know, 10k or something like that, and normally they have maybe sort of 1 or 2 kind of main climbs in them, and hills in the UK you're usually talking short punchy hills, sort of a kilometre, maybe a bit longer depending on the race. But for that you're talking maybe 3-minute plus effort, and you're talking uphill. So there's another layer of complexity into your road racing training. You need to do a lot of hill reps. You need to get really good in those climbs, and you need to be good at doing them on the edge. Okay? Another level of complexity when it comes to road racing is it's usually much longer than crit racing and e-racing, which tend to, generally speaking, max out at sort of an hour or so. So you don't really need to fuel in e-racing, as long as, assuming you're fueled up beforehand. Whereas in road racing, fueling becomes a big part of it. So you may or may not be aware, but your body stores enough glycogen, the storage form of glucose, in your muscles and your liver for about an hour to an hour and a half worth of exercise. And how long that lasts depends on the intensity level. So if you're racing, you're going to absolutely blaze through that glycogen, which means after about 40 minutes or so of racing, you need to start thinking about getting fuel on to kind of be able to sustain your effort. Okay, so road racing, vastly more complex than other forms of racing, I would say. You need to learn how to conserve energy. You need to learn how to take on energy. But you really need to learn how to ride as part of a bunch and to conserve as much energy as possible. It's more racecraft involved, basically. I think with crit racing you can get away with being a very strong but dumb rider if you're just really fit. But with road racing, you have to be smart, because any kind of wasted energy towards the beginning of the race will really creep up on you towards the end. Okay, so yeah, talking in terms of road racing, you've got your you're going to need your bigger base of endurance, so your bigger kind of consistency of volume at kind of, 3, 4, 5 hours, whatever, however long the types of races you're doing are. Okay, much more important than with crit racing and e-racing. Longer efforts, 3 to 8 minute type efforts. Usually some beefy hills. So again, getting good in the hills, getting good in the climbs, being able to conserve energy, so hiding as much as possible, letting others do the work, being prepared to lose. It's always a big factor in how good people are in terms of their race strategy. And learning to fuel, learning how much you need to take on board, when you need to take it on board. Again, that's a cycle seminar, that's a session that we've done, and we did one recently with Total Endurance Nutrition, who are our nutrition partners. So go back and watch that, because that was a super interesting talk. And I think talking to some of our athletes that joined it afterwards, they were surprised just by how much carbohydrate you can take in per hour safely. So yeah, or how much is optimal, I probably should say. So go have a little watch of that. Total Endurance and Nutrition, that session was with. But those are the main forms of racing that I was going to cover, guys. Obviously we could talk all day long about the various dips, gravel racing, cyclocross. We talk all day, and I probably could because I love this stuff. But how long we got? Got about 15 minutes left. 8 Ks or so, 8.5 Ks of the course. I think it's been a pretty decent course. Not too, just some little punches, nothing too crazy. Guys at the front seem to be driving it on. I don't know what my effort is. Let's have a little look see. Oh, maybe I'm not working as hard as I should be. I did train just before this session, so I won't be too harsh on myself. But guys, if you've got any questions, if you've got any particular events that you personally are training for and would like to know a little bit more about, then please do unmute yourself, ask away. You can use the chat feed if you don't feel comfortable unmuting yourself, or if you're on the live stream, hit the comments of the live stream and we'll pick those up and we can answer any questions. Failing that, I'll try and clarify what I was saying about crit racing. So I'll just give you a minute or so if you're trying to formulate some questions. And also try and get onto the back of this group. This is an example of an anaerobic effort. And relax. And hide. Okay, I'll just wait a little bit longer in case anyone's got any questions. If any of those types of racing, or if you want to ask anything about any events that you're doing. Obviously, I haven't talked about sportives and grand fondos, which I can talk about a little bit, but the problem with talking about that is it's even more varied. It's basically kind of like training for a marathon, really. Your training is all marshaled around the course, the type of event. So, if it's a super hilly, for instance, the Mallorca 312 was the other weekend, and that is enormous amount of climbing and super long race, super long sportive, sorry, sort of 9 hours or whatever, and you kind of you just have to do lots of long miles for that, basically. Or one thing you can do when it comes to endurance training, guys, there's no real substitute for getting out on those long weekend rides. But say you're struggling at the weekend, but you've got maybe not lots of time, you can do quite a lot of good work through frequency. So say you've got an hour and a half in the morning, hour and a half ride, and then if you've got an hour and a half in the evening, suddenly over the course of your day, you've accrued 3 hours of good quality, albeit low intensity training. And so you can easily accumulate a really good level of volume through frequency. So that's an important thing to remember when it comes to your long distance racing. And that again comes back to the point I was making right at the start about consistency. Consistency is, in my opinion, the main driver of performance, and you can achieve a lot through frequency in the absence of being able to do kind of your long base mileage at the weekend or whenever it is that you do it. Okay, a bit quiet this evening, so I'll go back to talking about the crit racing just very quickly, just to make sure I've made it clear. Basically, I was getting a bit tongue-tied over kind of the length of the efforts that you generally do in crit racing, because there's different scenarios essentially, which is where I was kind of starting to get confusing. There's different scenarios in which you can be. The kind of the general in bunch scenario, in the peloton or the bunch or whatever you want to call it, in the group. The general kind of profile of your power when you're in the bunch is generally kind of a lower average power than crit racing. So often just spinning, 55-60% of FTP, properly cruising, and then there'll be random bursts as someone tries to break away, and that's when you kind of have these longer sort of VO2 max / anaerobic efforts to try and stay on the wheel, stay in the bunch, or to chase down a breakaway. And they're usually longer than the types of efforts you do in a e-race, which are super short. Okay, tend to be minutes rather than seconds. And so, yeah, you're basically doing these big pushes of quite a low baseline, and that in itself can be a bit of a challenge. It's going from sort of just pootling along to suddenly, full gas effort for a few minutes. That in itself is a challenge and something to get used to, something to train. And then of course, that's one context. A second context is when you're trying to make a break. You have to break the elastic, so that initial burst has to be of such ferocity and duration that you can get away and kind of get to a point where the bunch behind you are like, oh, I don't want to chase him, he looks good, someone else needs to do it. And they start to play games and it's not rolling through. And once you're in that position, say you have broken the string, you get broken the elastic, suddenly you've got to stay there. You've got to keep on pushing, you've got to stay out of sight. And that's where suddenly your anaerobic effort doesn't go down to cruising at 55-60% of FTP. You're having to ride along at kind of sweet spot or a threshold effort. You're into like an individual time trial. So that's an example of how a crit race can change in terms of context. And that's where you still need to be able to do those threshold time trialing type efforts. So I think really all these races have their nuances, and you basically need to be able to do everything. But the amount of the kind of how good you are at everything is a sliding scale. So if you've got kind of time trialing or kind of triathlon on one end, and then you've got e-racing at the other, how much you need to be able to do kind of longer steady state efforts shifts more as you get towards the time trialing type of racing. But as you get down to e-racing, you still need to be able to do it. You still need to do those threshold intervals, those 5, 6, 7, 8, 10-minute intervals, that sweet spot or threshold. You still need to be able to do them, but you perhaps don't need to do them as much or in such a progressive way as you would for time trialing. Okay? And then obviously between those polar opposites of e-racing and time trialing, we've got crit racing and then road racing, and kind of how much base fitness, how much steady state riding, how much kind of threshold type work you do all kind of sits on that sliding scale. So I hope that clarifies things a little bit. Ultimately, guys, if you want help, you know, that's where people like myself come in. We look after a huge range of athletes. We don't just look after, you know, we've got athletes that are pushing for world champs, etc. But those aren't the only type of athlete we look after. We love looking after people new to racing, whether that be triathlon or cycling, because we can do so much more. You know, with our more elite athletes, our role becomes more secretarial, to be honest. But with the kind of less experienced athletes, you can do a lot to help in a very short space of time. So I think that's kind of my final piece of advice, is consider getting a coach. I think there's a myriad of reasons why having a coach is good, but I think one of the reasons that people don't necessarily give the greatest amount of appreciation to is that a coach can just help keep this stuff fun. And one of the big parts, particularly as we're getting into the race season now, one of my jobs really is kind of but helping athletes with the mental health side of things, and just reminding them that this stuff is meant to be fun. So treating the racing in that way. You know, I was really happy that we had an athlete this weekend who hasn't raced in a long time due to injury. You know, we gave him a very clear kind of pacing strategy, which is quite conservative. And he just said that when it came to the run, he just felt amazing, and being able to feel good at the end of a race reminded him of why he likes it. Anyway, so that's my sort of covert plug for our coaching services. It wasn't covert, or was it? Let's face it. But we've just got a couple of minutes left. We've got about just over 2.5k of the course left. So I'll just open the floor again to any questions, guys. Now this time, if you've got questions, it doesn't have to be about what we talked about tonight. You've got any kind of training related questions, always very happy to answer them. Or if you find that after the session, you know, if you think of something, don't be afraid to email us. We'll either respond to your email with some decent advice, or what we often do is just say, that's a really good question, we'll cover that in the next session. So don't be afraid to drop us a line after the session, guys, if you think of something, or you're perhaps a little bit nervous about asking. Just so you know, guys, for those of you on Zoom, it's only my voice that goes out onto the live stream, so don't be nervous about speaking and it being kind of caught on the stream or the recording. It's only me, and it's only my camera as well, which is cool. But what we've got now is just a couple of Ks, got a little bit of a downhill section, and a final little kick, final little tail at the end of the course. I'm going to stay on until the end of the course now. Might as well. Less than 2 Ks. Let's see if I can get to the front before the end. I always find the rubber banding effect kind of quite demoralising, because it's great for keeping you as part of the bunch, but then when you want to move up, it kind of restricts you a little bit. I find it in our we have a session for our squad athletes, our triathletes and cyclists that we look after on a day-to-day basis. And you know, I sometimes do the session with them, and one might have the rubber banding effect on, and I'll think I'm doing really well, and then I'll try and push on a little bit during an effort, and I realise actually my guy's just been pulling me along. It's just one of those sort of humbling moments that you might have as a coach. It's good fun though. Right, it's just over a K to go. And then you don't have to listen to my heavy breathing anymore. So it's a quick reminder of what we've got coming up for the rest of the week. Tomorrow night, we're back to our total workout strength and conditioning workshops. It's a free session, 6:30 p.m. BST. All the details are on the online page on our website. Then Wednesday, we've got the 2 sessions. The 9:30 a.m. session is the live coach one. Okay, again, free. Head to the online page to sign up for that one, or you can sign up through the RGT app. But again, much the same as this. Got coaching feed. And then the evening session on the Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. There isn't a coaching feed as such, but it's the same session as the morning one, and you can simply just run the recorded coaching feed. Now, if you're wondering where you can find that, that's on our Facebook page, or our streaming partners, VCN, will be on their social media channels, on their YouTube, on their Twitch, on their Facebook page, on Twitter as well. So there's various different places you can find it. And you can just run that live, you can just run that recorded stream whilst you're doing the workout, just so you can understand properly what the workout is meant to be about. And often in our sessions, we get people to turn erg mode off and things like that. So it's always really worthwhile joining the coaching feed or watching it as you do the session. And quite often, the sessions have a very specific purpose. And unless you join a coaching feed, it's not always easy to know what that purpose is. And I find in terms of motivation, it's super important athletes know why they're doing something, rather than just doing it like a robot. So here we go, up to the finish line now. So thanks very much for your company, everyone. I hope you found some of that interesting. Obviously, we're going to really cover stuff at a bit of a high level, but if you've got any specific questions, I'll stick around for a minute or so. If anyone's got any questions now that they're not cycling, or as I say, drop us a line, drop us an email, drop us a message on social media, and we'll very happily answer any questions after the session. But otherwise, guys, if there's no questions, I'll sign off and hope to see you guys all next week. Really well done. That felt like a very fast group ride. That was great. Enjoyed that. Okay then, guys. Thanks very much for your company, everyone, and hopefully see you next week. Take care, everyone.